Hi, good day everyone. My name is Lizelle Saldidia Tan, and today you will be learning about writing test items and tasks. One of the common mistakes made in language testing is for the test writers to begin the process by writing a set of items or tasks that are intuitively felt to be relevant to the test takers. In defining the construct, we wish to test the implications for the kinds of items or tasks that we choose to put in our test. In this unit, which is complementary to Unit A4, the process of item and task writing as part of the iterative process of writing test specifications. In order to do this, we will draw on another paradigm in language testing, the evidence-centered design, or the ECD. First, let's discuss what is an iterative process. Iterative process. An iterative process is one in which all tasks are undertaken in a cyclical fashion. This process is much messier because all the activities feed each other. This is why test specifications are not set until the final test is ready to be rolled out on actual use. Like the Golden Gate Bridge, which we discussed in Unit A4, it says that a wheel built test can be adapted and changed even after it is operational and as things change, provided that we have a clear record or specifications of how it was built in the first place. Test specifications should be continually evolving documents. As construct definition becomes more precise and evidence is collected to support the link between the task and the construct. Now, what is a task? A task is essentially a device that rather allows the language tester to collect evidence. This evidence is a response from the test taker, whether this is a check in a box or an extended contribution to a dialogue. Now let's talk about the response as evidence. The response as evidence indicates that we are using the responses in order to make inferences about the ability of the test taker to use language in the domains and range situations defined in the test specifications. What we have tried to show is that the real question facing us when the time comes to think about the test content is whether the tasks that we intend to use are likely to generate evidence that can be scored and whether we can convince others that the score will be related to the kinds of claims that we wish to make about learners' ability. Writing tasks and items is always a collaborative and iterative process that takes more time than is usually allocated for the task. In order to illustrate this perspective on task and item design, we have reviewed the approach known as evidence-centered design. An evidence-centered design which attempts to force test designers into considering questions of validity at the very earliest stages of the process. In this, we looked at the kind of questions that would be generated using a specific example from the field of testing reading. Finally, we considered washback in language testing. What is washback in language testing? This is how the test and its content may impact upon language testing. There is an argument that the dangers of teaching to the test through the simple use of test type materials in the classroom can be avoided if the teacher has access to the claims that underline test designs. When this information is available, the teacher is empowered to design his or her own approaches and materials that aim to develop the abilities that the test is designed to measure. If all this seems complicated, it is, however, believed that ECD or the evidence centered design is quite valuable in certain test settings. We find ourselves curious whether ECD must be defined as Miss Levy and others have formalized it. This will be tackled further in Unit Safe 5. Proponents of the communicative approach to language testing argue that only tasks that mirrored language use in the real world should be used in the communicative language tests, reflecting the actual purpose of real world communication in clearly defined contexts using inputs and prompts that had not been adapted for use with second language speakers, according to Morrow. Rather, we need to look at how sets of multiple choice items are used with specific tests in order to judge whether responses to those items or the resulting score would support the inference from the evidence to the claims we wish to make about the underlying knowledge or ability of the test taker. The old criticism of the multiple choice item is being something that we don't do in the real world. This is according to Underhill, and is therefore one that we can no longer recognize as meaningful. Therefore, it is the job of the test specifications to make our claim about such responses clear. It is also important that we see the tasks or items that we design for tests as part of a larger picture. And one approach to doing this in a systematic way is ECD. What is ECD? Evidence Design or ECD. This is a methodology for test design and constructions developed at Educational Testing Service or the ETS by Ms. Levy. ECD is a methodology for designing assessment that underscores the central role of evidentiary reasoning in assessment design. ECD is based on the three premises. First, so we have the ECD defined in the following ways. First, an assessment must build around the important knowledge in the domain of interest and an understanding of how that knowledge is acquired and put to use. Second, the chain of reasoning from what participants say and do is assessments to inferences about what they think, can do, or should do next. And it must be based on the principles of evidentiary reasoning. Later, we are going to discuss and clarify what is an evidentiary reasoning. Third, purpose must be the driving force behind design decisions, which reflect constraints, resources, and conditions of use. This is according to Ms. Levin. Now let's talk about the so-called evidentiary reasoning. What is this evidentiary reasoning? This refers to a validity argument. It is the reasoning that leads from evidence to the evaluation of the strength of validity claim. Now let's talk about a construct-centered approach. This is an important concept in understanding and sharing reasoning. So, construct-centered approach begins by asking what knowledge, skills, or other attributes should be assessed. or what behaviors or performances should reveal those constructs, and also what tasks or situations should elicit those behaviors. Thus, the nature of the construct guides the selection of construction of relevant tasks as well as the rational development of construct-based scoring criteria and rubrics. Now, according to Pierce, the way in which we do things reflects how we think we know things. And it is through this that he came up with the four ways of knowing. What are these four ways of knowing? Four ways of knowing. First, we have the tenacity. Now, for tenacity, we believe what we do because we have always believed this and not questioned it. What we do is therefore based on what we have always done. Next, we have authority. Authority, in here, we believe that we do because these beliefs come from an authoritative source. So, authority from authoritative source. What we do is therefore follow the practice dictated by the source. Next, we have the a priori. So, for this, what we believe appears reasonable to us when we think about it because it feels intuitively right. What we do is therefore what we think is reasonable and right. And then the last one is scientific. So for this way of knowing, what we believe is established by investigating what happens in the world. What we do, for instance, is therefore based on methods that lead to an increase in knowledge. Okay, so according to Underhill, he made an emphasis on this statement. As ye teach, so shall ye test. Also, according to Underhill, he meant to say that in language testing, common sense is far more important than what language testing experts did. ECD, as originally proposed in the literature, claims to provide a very systematic way of thinking about the process of assessment and the place of the task within that process of assessment and the place. And it is here that we must revisit the confusing terminology discussed in Unit 3A, framework and model. So later, we will be I will be clarifying to you the framework and model of this ECD or the structure of ECD. Now let's talk about the structure of ECD. So in this part of the topic, we are going to focus on the framework and the model of ECD. ECD is considered to be a framework in the sense that it is structured and formal and thus enables the actual work of designing and implementing assessments. ECD is sometimes referred to as Conceptual Assessment Framework or CAF. Also, ECD has this design objects. Within ECD style test specification, there are 6 models of design objects, and these are as follows. First, we have the student model. Student model. This comprises a statement of the particular mix of knowledge, skills, or abilities about which we wish to make claims as a result of the test. In other words, it is the list of constructs that are relevant to a particular testing situation, extracted from a model of communicative competence or performance. Okay, so this has been discussed in Unit A3. So this is the highest level model in ECD and needs to be designed before any other models can be addressed because it defines what we wish to claim about an individual test taker. So in here, this model, the student the student model rather answers the question, what are we testing? So it can be as simple as a single construct, such as reading, or includes multiple constructs, such as identifying main argument, identifying examples, understanding discourse markers for problem solution patterns, and so on. So whatever our constructs, we have to relate them directly to the target language use situation by establishing the relevance to performance in that domain. So next we have the evidence models. So in this model, once we have selected constructs for the student model, we need to ask what evidence we need to collect in order to make inferences from performance to underlying knowledge or ability. Therefore, the evidence model answers the question, what evidence do we need to test the constructs? So in ECD evidence, it is frequently referred to as a work product. Work product means nothing more than whatever comes from what the test takers do. From the work product, there are one or more observable variables. In a multiple choice test, for instance, the work product is a set of responses to the items, and the observable variables are the number of correct and incorrect responses. So in performance tests, the issues are more complex. The work products may be contributions to an oral proficiency interview, and the observable variables would be the realizations in speech of the constructs in this the model. Thus, if one of the constructs were fluency, the observable variables may include speed of delivery, circumlocution, or filling pauses. So in both cases, we state that we observe and why it is relevant to the construct from the performance, and these statements are referred to as evidence rules. So this is the evaluation component of the evidence model according to Miss Levy. Next, we have the task models. So for task models, we can now see where test tasks and items fit into the picture. When we know what we wish to test and what evidence we need to collect in order to get a score from which we can make inferences to what we want to test, we next ask, how do we collect the evidence? Task models therefore describe the situations in which test takers respond to items or tasks that generate the evidence we need. Task models minimally comprise three elements, and these are the presentation material or input, the work products or what the test takers actually do, and finally the task model variables that describe task features. Next, we have the presentation model. So how is this model different from the first three models of the ECD structure? So presentation model, items and tasks can be presented in many different formats. For instance, a text and set of reading items may be presented in paper and pencil format or on a computer. The presentation model describes how these will be laid out and presented to the test takers. So in computer-based testing, this would be the interface design for each item type and the test overall. So templates are frequently produced to help item writers to produce new items to the same specifications. Next, let's talk about the assembly model. So an assembly model accounts for how the student model, evidence models, and task models work together. It does this by specifying two elements, the targets and the constraints. So a target is simply the reliability with which each construct in a student model should be measured, while a constraint relates to the mix of items or tasks on the test that must be included in order to represent the domain adequately. So this model could be taken as answering the question, how much do we need to test? How much do we need to test? So the last model is the delivery model. So this final model is not independent of the others, but explains how they will work together to deliver the actual test. For example, how the modules will operate if they are delivered in computer computer adaptive mode, or a set paper and pencil forms. Of course, changes at this level will also impact on other models and how they are designed. This model would also deal with issues that are relevant at the level of the entire test, such as test security and the timing of sections of the test, according to Ms. Levy. However, it also contains four processes referred to as the delivery architecture. These are the presentation process, response processing, summary scoring, and activity selection. So again, these are the six models or design objects. First, we have the student model, evidence models, task models, presentation model, and assembly model and delivery model. Now let's move on to, so it is perhaps items or tasks that first come to mind when we think of tests, correct? This is because they are the most obvious, visible part of a test. And for the most part, it is considered easy to write them or copy them for use in test preparation classes. Now how do we describe items and tasks? So, in describing items and tasks, we have three steps to discuss according to Ms. Levy. So, first, identify the knowledge, skills, or abilities or the constructs that we wish to test. The second step in task designing is identifying the relationship between the constructs and the behaviors in situations that call for their use. And the last one, describe the features of situations that provide the evidence to draw inferences from behavior to constructs. When it comes to describing tasks, we need frameworks of typologies that will allow us to describe their key features. For example, according to Pika et al., tasks should be goal oriented and should encourage learners to work towards achieving the goal. Now let's move on to task activities and goals. So for this, we have the first one, interactional activity. Okay, so let's have the first one. Let's have the first one, interactional activity. So this relates to information. So each participant holds different information and needs both to give and to receive information in order to complete the task. One participant holds all the information and supplies it, or each participant holds all the information. So the next one is the interaction requirement for activity. So for this, each participant is expected both to request and to supply information compared to interactional activity where each participant holds different information and needs both to give and to receive information. So let's continue on the interaction requirement for activity. So one participant supplies all the information. Each participant is expected to request and supply information, but is not obliged to do so. How about for the communication goal? So with respect to goal orientation, participants have convergent goals rather, or participants have divergent goals. So these are task activities and goals. Now let's move on to the different characteristics of language. Did you know that there are different characteristics of language? So what are they? They are as follows. So first we have the organizational characteristic. So for the organizational characteristics, we have grammatical. When we say grammatical, this refers to the vocabulary, the syntax, or the organization of words or phrases in a sentence, the phonology or graphology. The second, in the organizational characteristics of language, we have the textual. So for the textual, we have cohesion, the rhetorical or conversational organization. So aside from organizational characteristics of language, we also have the so-called pragmatic characteristics. So for the pragmatic characteristics, we have functional. So for functional, this means this refers to our ideational, manipulative, heuristic, imaginative. And when we say social linguistic, these deals with the dialect or variety, the register, naturalness, cultural references, and the figurative language. So it is possible to assign labels to items such that test questions can be coded against schemes like that above. So coding tasks for specific features becomes important if we can demonstrate that those features are drivers of task difficulty. So we shall return to the matter of coding in our exercises in this unit. So in this case, if we knew that the use of a formal register by a speaker of higher social status in academic listening tasks always increased item difficulty, so we would wish to ensure that we coded the item for these features in order to ensure that the task did not contain too many or too few such items to best represent the domain of academic listening. So this is a special instance of evidentiary reasoning. We are arguing that particular features of the item do trigger difficulty. So now that we are done with the characteristics of language, let's move on to the abilities of a good reader. Do you know the abilities of a good reader? So here are just three of 14 identifiable abilities of the good reader. Okay, so first we have a good reader is fluent and automatic, has fluent and automatic word recognition skills. Second, a good reader has a large recognition vocabulary. And a good reader has the ability to recognize common word combinations or what we call the collocations. So again, the reading process and the competencies that are required for effective reading according to Ray. So, so as these concern vocabulary, they would be part of textual or discourse competence. So depending upon the model of competence that we decide to use, which you're going to need to take a look at Unit A3 and which elements of the model we extract to place in a framework for a particular testing context. We would therefore wish our respect to generate a number of items that test the lexical component of textual competence and specify key features of the items that may drive difficulty. So consider these sample items. So I have here a set of words. You're going to identify the odd word out by drawing a circle around it. Okay, so suppose you're done circling out those odd words for you. So what do you think are these items testing? Which items do you think are easy? And which items are more difficult? Do you think it is possible to make a claim from responses to these items to the textual competence of the test taker? Mm. So the kinds of features that make our textual competence items easier or more difficult may include the following. So again, you may ask questions. Okay, so now let's talk about the kind of features that make our textual competence items easier. So the first one are collocations or sets. So does the item test collocation? Meaning, are there words that tend to occur together in language use or word sets that are usually considered to be alternatives? And the other feature is the use of superordinates. Superordinates is the correct answer in a set of a superordinate rather than a co-hyponym, for instance, the relationship between animal and dog, as opposed to the relationship between dog and cat. Next is the cultural references. Don't do the words in a collocation item. Collocate because they are part of a culture-bound idiomatic expression. Okay, so of another feature that make our textual competence items easier are as follows. I apologize because I forgot to include them in my PowerPoint presentation. So aside from these three features, we also have word frequency. So word frequency are the words more or less frequent in language use. These may be difficult to define and could have many levels. For this purpose, we will assume that any words that would not be in the top 5,000 in word frequency list would be less frequent. So last feature that you need to know is the abstractness. Are the words more or less abstract in meaning? So again, this is difficult to define. Here, we will just assume that abstract words are those that not refer to objects in the physical world. So which of these features do you think would you expect to make the items more difficult? Can you think of any other features that you may wish to include? So we'll now proceed to the claims to be made in relation to construct. So let's talk about the claims we can make in relation to construct. So we can estimate the level of textual competence in test takers. We can also generalize the ability of an individual to read a variety of texts in the real world. Okay, so here is the assumption. Items that test collocation test that part of lexical competence that requires a knowledge of how words are placed in chains that tend to co-occur in natural spoken or written discourse. Items that test sets that part of lexical competence that requires a knowledge of how words are selected from alternative words with similar meaning, or the hyponyms, or are related to more general words that make sense, or the superordinate. So this ability is critical to decoding texts and efficient reading. So I think this is the end of the report that has been assigned to me. I hope you learned something from this video. Looking forward to be working on more videos in this subject. Thank you so much for your time and God bless everyone.